At the beginning of the movie, ex-Defense Intelligence Officer Frank Cardin welcomes Davies, a new recruit, to his elite and highly efficient clandestine mercenary team. The team discusses their upcoming mission and formulates a plan to eliminate their next target, billionaire Lytle Hammond SR. Although Hammond is a key political donor to high society, he recently opposed stem cell research, making him a target. As part of the first phase, Frank and his partner kill Lytle Hammond Jr., the billionaire's son, successfully staging it to look like a hit-and-run accident. Afterward, Frank travels to a small town, renting an apartment under a false identity. But as he heads out to the city for the next step of the mission, he's involved in a car accident. Frank is rushed to the hospital, and as nurses treat him, they discover a gun in his pocket and alert the local police. The following day, Frank regains consciousness in a hospital bed, handcuffed. The local police chief introduces himself, explaining that Frank is wanted and that they have traced the gun to him. 2 officers are assigned to guard him overnight, and the chief informs Frank that us marshals will take him into custody the next day. With limited options, Frank steals a phone from a nurse and contacts his team to inform them of his predicament. Davies argues it's too dangerous to attempt a rescue and suggests proceeding with the mission without Frank. However, when the team reminds him that he won't get paid without Frank, Davies reluctantly agrees to help. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., ex-cop and single father Ray Keene is frustrated with his son Chris, who has been suspended from school for smoking weed. Wanting to bond with Chris and guide him toward making better choices, Ray plans a camping trip to Chris's favorite spot. They set out early, and once there, Chris takes charge, leading the way through the scenic forest. Elsewhere, the U.S. Marshals apprehend Frank, handcuff him, and begin transporting him to D.C. They attempt to question him about what he was doing in the small town, but he remains tight-lipped. After several hours on the road, as their car passes through a wooded area, in the same wooded area where Ray and Chris are camping, the road is blocked by a car. The driver of the U.S. Marshals vehicle steps out to investigate, but is immediately shot by Frank's team. A barrage of gunfire follows, killing everyone except Frank and one of the marshals. The car then slides off the road and tumbles over a bridge into the river below. Frank and the surviving officer manage to escape the car, but continue fighting in the river. Ray spots the struggle and rushes to help, pulling both men from the water. The marshal informs Ray that Frank is a dangerous prisoner, hands him his gun and the keys to Frank's handcuffs, and dies, leaving Ray responsible for taking Frank into custody. Frank pleads with Ray to release him, even threatening him, but Ray stands firm. He puts Chris by his side, keeping Frank in front of them at gunpoint, and leads them through the forest. Meanwhile, on the other side, Frank's team finishes cleaning up the accident scene and enters the woods to track him down. After some time, Frank's team picks up his trail and begins following. Ray notices this and, with Chris's help, adjusts their route to avoid being caught. They walk all day, and as evening approaches, it begins to rain. Ray guides them to a steep ledge, suggesting they climb down to hide in a cave beneath it to stay safe from both the rain and their pursuers. As they descend, Chris misjudges a step and slips on the wet rocks. Frank instinctively grabs him, keeping Chris from falling until he regains his balance. Ray pulls Chris to safety, and the 3 make it into the cave. They settle in for the night, during which Chris asks Frank what he does for a living. Frank vaguely replies that he removes obstacles to progress, which irritates Ray, but the night passes without conflict. Unaware of the cave, Frank's team camps on top of the ledge. During the night, Davies receives a call from Gwen Miles, the head of the U.S. Marshals, who has used Frank's services in the past. She offers Davies $500,000 to eliminate Frank, ensuring the government won't be implicated. Davies accepts the deal. The next morning, with new motivation, Davies wakes his team early, and they resume the search. They soon spot Ray leading Frank and Chris out of the cave. As they walk, Frank and Ray begin to understand one another and form an unlikely bond of mutual respect, despite being on opposite sides of the law. After some time, they encounter a hiking couple named Sandra and Lachlan. Ray convinces them to join the group for their safety. Meanwhile, Frank's team follows closely, but is slowed by the need to avoid helicopters sent by the local police to aid the search. The command post. Gwen concludes that Frank must be in town to assassinate the president, who is due to visit in a few days. She begins coordinating the necessary security measures. Meanwhile, one of Frank's team members flags down a helicopter by pretending to be injured, with Davies lying nearby, faking unconsciousness. The officers aboard the helicopter land, believing they've encountered an emergency. Davy shoots and kills both officers, and Frank's team seizes control of the helicopter. They fly over the area and soon spot Frank, Ray, Chris, and the couple crossing a fragile wooden bridge. Just after they make it across, Ray hands the gun to Chris, telling him to aim it at Frank, and instructs the couple to help destroy the bridge, hoping to slow down the pursuing team. However, they are unaware that Frank's men are closing in on them from above. Seeing the helicopter, Chris mistakenly assumes it belongs to the police. Excited, he hands the gun to Lachlan and starts calling for help. As Frank's team approaches and sees Lachlan pointing the gun at Frank, they immediately shoot and kill him, causing panic in the group. Seizing the moment, Frank tries to flee, with Ray quickly following. After getting Chris and Sandra to safety in the woods, Ray chases Frank and finds him attempting to board the helicopter. Ray manages to shoot the tail rotor of the chopper while dodging gunfire. The damage leaves Frank's men struggling to control the helicopter, forcing them to turn back. However, the chopper crashes a few miles away. Fortunately, none of Frank's men are injured. Back at the command post, tensions rise as officials grow desperate for answers. Gwen continues receiving orders from her superiors to eliminate Frank and passes the message on to Davies. Disappointed that his escape plan failed, Frank reluctantly rejoins the group. Sandra is in shock, barely holding it together, while Ray tries to keep everyone moving forward. Chris suggests they head to a cabin used as the camp management office deeper in the forest. The group agrees and hikes the rest of the day, reaching the cabin by evening. Ray cuffs Frank to a bedpost and instructs Chris to watch him while he talks to Sandra, trying to comfort her after the ordeal. Later, Chris apologizes to his father for the mess they're in, but Ray reassures him, and the two grow closer in their understanding of one another. Frank's men, after recovering from the crash, pick up the trail and track them to the cabin. They wait until nightfall to launch their attack. Once it's dark, Frank's team demands that Ray release Frank, threatening to storm the cabin if he doesn't comply. Frank also pleads with Ray, promising to protect them if released, urging him to act before it's too late. Exhausted and wanting to keep everyone safe, Ray hands the gun to Chris once again and gives the keys to Frank's cuffs. Just as Frank begins to free himself, one of his men jumps into the cabin, startling Chris into shooting him. A fight ensues as the rest of Frank's men charge in, but Ray manages to fend them off, killing them all. The last surviving attacker charges at Ray, but is shot dead by Sandra. During the chaos, Frank seizes the opportunity to grab Chris, taking him hostage. Davies, the only surviving member of Frank's team, attempts to shoot and kill Frank from a distance, but fails. Frank, holding Chris, warns him to stay quiet or face death, and flees into the woods. The police arrive, questioning Sandra and Ray about the incident, promising to do everything they can to locate Chris. Gwen contacts Davies, instructing him to eliminate Chris as well, fearing that Frank might reveal his involvement in the assassination plot. Ray, desperate for answers, returns home and tries to distract himself by watching the news. He hears a report about Lyle Hammond Jr.'s funeral, and as the journalist describes Lyle Hammond SR as an obstacle to progress, Ray realizes that the billionaire is Frank's next target. Ray contacts the local authorities, warning them that the president isn't the real target, but his concerns are dismissed. Determined, Ray decides to attend the funeral and stop Frank himself. At the funeral, Ray confronts Frank, demanding to know Chris's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Davies, who has followed Frank to the event, takes a shot at them from a distance. Frank notices Davies and stealthily approaches him, ultimately killing him. However, due to the ongoing commotion, Frank's plan to assassinate Lyle Hammond SR fails. In the end, Frank hands Ray the keys to the hotel room where Chris is being held. Ray, accompanied by local authorities, goes to the hotel and successfully rescues his son. Frank later tracks down Gwen, threatening her with dire consequences if anything happens to the boy, leaving her terrified. Ray, now back home, invites Sandra to a barbecue. While they spend time together, a news report comes on the radio announcing that Lyle Hammond SR has died in a boating accident. However, Ray knows better than to believe it's just an accident. The end.